Cutting-edge technology unearths a secret in the Peruvian desert.
I don't know of anywhere on Earth that looks like this.
Drone footage reveals the truth about an ancient Arabian city.
It's breathtaking.
Cryptic rings of a giant's wheel staring up from the ground.
It's kind of like a maze, which only makes it more mysterious.
And headless stone gods in the mountains of the Middle East.
This is a place not short on mysteries. It's incredible.
Everywhere we look on our planet, there's evidence of the past. In nature, in buildings, in relics. Each holds a mystery that technology now allows us to see from above. What new secrets are revealed? Across the globe lie countless magnificent and mysterious ancient structures. Each one holding long-hidden secrets that can only be uncovered by a view from above. To the west of Peru's Andes Mountains is one of the driest regions on Earth. A land that has remained virtually unchanged for millions of years. Here, around 14 kilometers from the Pacific coast, drone footage reveals a bizarre ridgeline carved into the mountain landscape.
What are we seeing here?
It looks like there's a hill and what appears to be the scales of a dragon along its back, as if one were buried there, with its treasure perhaps.
I've never seen anything like this. What is this place?
This massive hilltop structure is known as Chanquillo, and this uncanny site has been a mystery for centuries.
Chanquillo is several hectares in size. Chanquillo contains several monumental human constructions that are spread out over this deserted landscape. Part of it is a huge construction known as the Fortified Temple. It's a fortification that contains and protects a temple that is probably devoted to the cult of the sun. But the area of Chanquillo is clearly defined by the 13 towers.
These strange towers loom above Chanquillo, arranged in a perfect line from north to south.
Why are you erecting a series of towers along the top of a hill in the middle of a desert?
Are the 13 towers parts of an elaborate defense? Maybe observation posts or watchtowers?
Perhaps a clue can be found 13,000 kilometers away in the Judean desert of southern Israel.
Here, the legendary fortress of Masada looms high above the Dead Sea. This isolated rocky bastion witnessed the defiant final stand of survivors of the Jewish revolt against Roman rule after the fall of Jerusalem in 70 CE.
When we look at Masada, what we see are some unmistakable similarities to Chanquillo.
Both sites are on high ground.
But Chanquillo is not nearly as dramatically constructed, whereas the edges of Masada deliver a more natural fortress with steep mountain slopes that make it virtually unassailable.
At the Chanquillo complex, there are no signs of turrets or battlements.
Architecturally, these towers don't look like they were built for defense.
If these desert ruins aren't the remains of an ancient fortress, what else could they be?
My initial interest in Chanquillo was to study the origins of warfare in the Andean pre-Hispanic world. But I also found in the literature of the 19th century travelers and explorers a mention of the number of towers, 13, as a clue into a possible astronomical function.
The rising and setting of the sun, the solstices, phases of the moon, and the position of particular stars and constellations have been used in all ancient civilizations to determine seasons, months, and years.
Wherever we take a closer look at ancient sacred structures, what we often discover is that in every culture, people are preoccupied with measuring and recording the passage of time.
Ancient timekeeping structures have been discovered all over the world. And there may be a clue at one of the oldest of these sites, 10,000 kilometers away in Crethis, Scotland.
The Warrenfield Timber Hall is an impressive archaeological site associated with the earliest farmers in northern Britain. A total of 12 pits were revealed here.
The pit group's relative sizes and distinctive shapes are highly suggestive of the lunar phases.
Archaeologists were able to prove that the pit alignment was developed to mirror the phases of the moon, passing from one to the next along the alignment.
Could this be what's happening in Chankillo?
We needed to research the possibility that these were horizon markers, that these were the lines of a ruler built on the sky to keep track of the sun. For that to work, you need to position something like the towers along the arc that the sun describes on the horizon, but you also need to determine a fixed point on the ground. We hypothesized that this was the observing point. Let's imagine it's the astronomer's chair, where he or she sits and looks through the telescope to study astronomical phenomena. This relatively narrow corridor is actually leading to a particular point where you can see the 13 towers in their most magnificent presentation. This wall, even though right now on the surface you cannot see all of it, when excavated, it continues up to this point, forming a narrow threshold. This turned out to be a very, very special place. Even if you are 2 meters behind the threshold, you will not see the full 13 towers. I like to think of it as the focus mechanism in a lens. Only when you are in the right position does the picture come into focus. Here, just as well, only when you are at the right position do you have an unobstructed view of the 13 towers.
At one end of the line stands a tower that marks the June solstice. And at the other end, another marks the December solstice. A space between the two middle towers marks the equinox. Every tower in between marks a date.
We have estimated that you can determine any day of the year with a precision of 1 or 2 days. So it's really an amazing device that is highly precise, especially in the context of a society without a writing system. While there is a west observing point where we are right now, we hypothesized there must have been on the other side of the towers an equal building containing an east observing point. But we had to prove it.
Finding this eastern observation point is the crucial piece to proving how this amazing calendar worked.
If Ivan's theory is correct, the 13 towers not only tell the time of day at sunrise, but would also be able to do the exact same thing at sunset.
That would make this the most sophisticated solar calendar on the planet.
But in the 4 square kilometers of windswept rock outcrops and sand ramps, it was like looking for the proverbial needle in a haystack.
In order to crack this centuries-old case, researchers turned to a high-tech view from above.
This is a thermal camera, not a normal optical camera, so the sensor is actually reading temperature. Chankillo is a place where most of the archaeological features are very close to the surface. But when they're buried, we cannot see them with normal drones. Infrared technology takes advantage of the fact that these materials that are buried under the surface absorb solar radiation during the day and emit this radiation at different temperatures at night. So we come here with this drone at night and we can take pictures that are actually thermal images of what's going on, and we can see it in the form of a map.
What will this cutting-edge view from above uncover about this 2,000-year-old mystery?
When flying the drone armed with an infrared sensor over the area where we expected the east observing point to be, we were able to see this small structure. There's absolutely nothing else except this relatively small platform, leading us to conclude that yes, it is an observing point. It was really like a eureka moment for us. It was a very exciting moment of celebration. We kept coming at night for sunset, for sunrise, to recreate that sense of discovery. Without the view from above, it would have been nearly impossible to prove convincingly that this was an east observing point.
This eastern observation point proves the ancients tracked the movement of the sun as it passed over the towers from the east as well as from the west. Observing the towers from both ends meant they could tell time at sunrise and at sunset.
One of the things that amazes me about Chanquillo is that we are experiencing exactly the same astronomical phenomena, the same alignment that people designed to watch. And that is incredible. I feel like I'm being transported into the past 2,300 years by seeing exactly the same magical phenomena that occurs here every day.
Truly a masterwork that could only be fully appreciated from the air, and a mystery that could have only been solved with a view from above.
From sun-baked rock to arid sands, ancient structures rise in remote and unforgiving landscapes. On the parched desert plains of northwestern Saudi Arabia, a majestic monolith rises from a lonesome outcrop of sandstone. This strange edifice rises a stunning 23 meters high.
It sort of looks like a massive, grand house.
Could the monolith actually be a sandstone dwelling?
Perhaps a clue lies 12,000 kilometers away, nestled in the Colorado cliffs of Mesa Verde.
Mesa Verde has over 600 Puebloan abodes built into natural sandstone alcoves.
Many of these homes have multiple rooms, and some structures are large enough to house at least 150 people.
There are over 4,000 archaeological sites weaved into the landscape, from small villages to longhouses, and there's even a palace built into the cliff.
But this monolith is completely standalone. There doesn't appear to be any immediate neighbors, like you can see with a lot of the dwellings at Mesa Verde.
It seems so strange for someone to build a big house with no windows and one door in the middle of the desert by itself.
This mysterious monolith on the Arabian plains is known locally as Qasr al-Farid.
From Arabic to English, this translates to the Lonely Castle.
The exterior is fabulous, but it doesn't seem to have the same attributes found at other Arabian castles in this region.
It's not built on a slope, and there are no artillery walls or towers.
There are rough, unfinished chisel marks on the lower third, which makes me think that it was actually carved from the top down.
Which is really odd because castles, lonely or not, normally start life from a firm foundation and are forged from the bottom up.
I'm really not convinced that this is a literal castle.
The Lonely Castle is indeed not what it seems. Undisturbed for almost 2,000 years, it's a sandstone sculpted burial tomb.
It's a huge tomb. Was this built for someone extremely prominent in the ancient world?
The tomb was apparently paid for by a decorated general who died in battle before it was finished. But I don't think he's even buried here.
Usually, tombs like this aren't solo. They're the centerpiece in a bigger complex to show off the deceased's wealth and social status.
Is there more to uncover here?
To find an answer, we search with a vast view from above and discover the Lonely Castle is not as lonely as we first thought.
It appears so isolated, but it's actually the largest of over 100 tombs.
There's over 10 square kilometers of desert with numerous buildings hand-carved into giant boulders.
There seem to be clusters of necropolises disguised by the natural landscape.
This is the Al-Hejr archaeological site, also known as Hegra.
What I really want to know about Hegra is this. Who is inside all of these tombs?
All the tombs vary in size, from one small room to larger chambers. Some are easily accessible, but others you have to brace yourself to climb into.
I would imagine the bigger tombs can hold numerous graves, depending on the status and size of a family.
Perhaps a closer view from above can reveal clues as to who's inside these tombs.
They're each decorated differently with crow steps, eagles, intricate figures, snakes, and sphinxes.
Sphinxes? Those are those mythical hybrid creatures that you mostly get in ancient Egypt.
Is it possible that pharaohs were entombed all the way over here in Saudi Arabia?
I don't think so. Pharaohs were typically buried in pyramidal shrines.
And don't rock-carved Egyptian temples typically heavily feature Assyrian pillars and hieroglyphs? We're not seeing those here.
On some tombs, you can find the monstrous face of the Gorgon Medusa. I'm pretty sure that's the calling card of the Greeks.
And don't you think the columns look quite Romanesque?
There's obviously a mix of influences, from Greek to Roman and Egyptian.
Could all of these people be buried here?
It's not impossible, but I'm more inclined to suggest that these motifs were just borrowed by someone else.
A closer look at the decorations on the tombs reveals even more clues.
More than 50 facades have inscriptions or petroglyphs etched into the rock.
Can these writings tell us exactly who's buried here?
They might, but how are we going to translate the language?
Perhaps a key to this cipher can be found only 14 kilometers away, on Mount Jabal Ikma.
Jabal Ikma is considered a crossroad of civilizations.
This mountain contains around 450 inscriptions, writings, and drawings on its rocky cliffs.
There are messages from several kingdoms still set in stone.
It's an unprecedented collection of the region's most ancient languages, which we can use as a sort of open reference library.
Like Jabal Ikma, the monumental tombs at Hegra feature early Arabic dialects, but also Latin and Greek.
It's such an assortment of prose, it seems impossible to know who used this necropolis.
Perhaps what is needed to solve this mystery is not a view from above, but a view from within. In 2008, archaeologists excavating the tombs found crucial clues: human bones buried with impressive artifacts.
The people entombed here were definitely elite. The expensive treasures buried with them include coins, bronze bracelets, rings, necklaces, and glass beads.
And there are also commodities like combs, cosmetic tubes, and embroidered handkerchiefs.
Organic material and textiles found on the bones show the bodies were carefully covered with a mixture of fats and resins from incense-bearing trees and shrubs.
Wasn't it the Egyptians who famously used resin in their funerary rites?
They did, but so did the Romans and the Greeks. It was a pretty typical ancient burial practice for important people.
That gives us the usual suspects, but no actual answers.
This is somewhat blowing me away. I mean, who on earth do these bones, wrapped up in leather and slathered in balm, actually belong to?
To our surprise, most of the remains uncovered at Hegra are dated from the ancient Nabatean kingdom from the 1st century CE.
The Nabateans were a nomadic tribe who brought considerable wealth and influence across the ancient world. But the discovery of their remains here at Hegra raises more questions than answers.
How did they get here? I mean, the Nabateans aren't known to have originated from this area.
Why would they be entombed that far from home?
Perhaps the answer to this desert riddle lies 450 kilometers away in Jordan, home to the once mighty capital of the Nabatean Empire, the ancient city of Petra.
The remains of Petra in Jordan feature royal Nabatean tombs, obelisks, temples, palaces, and sacrificial sites.
You've got houses, you've got streets, you've got an amphitheater, you've got a monastery, and even a treasury.
Petra is one of the world's most spectacular archaeological sites. A massive ancient city made of more than 500 ornate buildings and tombs.
Also skillfully engineered into sandstone, just like the tombs at Hegra.
Does that mean it's possible Hegra isn't just a necropolis?
Could the Nabateans have built a second giant city in the desert?
Was Hegra actually once a bustling metropolis?
Answers to this mystery may be revealed by another view from above, over the ancient Nabatean capital of Petra.
These two Nabatean wonders are both carved from sandstone with similar designs, decorations, and both are home to hundreds of tombs.
Could Hegra and Petra have been sister cities? And what histories could these two stunning sites have in common?
We know that the Nabateans at Petra were really prolific wheeler dealers, and they were trading spices and silk with China, India, Rome, and Egypt.
Petra was a thriving trading hub on the incense route, a network extending over 2,000 kilometers that allowed traders to transport goods from the Near East across the Arabian Peninsula to the Mediterranean.
So you got to ask yourself, if Hegra was Petra's sister city, was it also an important pit stop on the famed incense route?
Yes. Hegra was a crossroads of commerce, perfectly situated where the north-south incense route intersected with other inland trade routes.
Hegra was an important stop for traders crossing the Arabian Peninsula, carrying frankincense, spices, and luxury goods from Yemen and India.
Which likely explains many of the borrowed cultural influences found at Hegra. People from all walks of life came through here and inspired the Nabateans.
But why did life at Hegra end?
The Nabateans were basically eventually forgotten after the Roman Emperor Trajan conquered them in 106 CE.
The archaeological remains were never reused or restored.
And Hegra's legacy faded into the desert.
There's no doubt that Hegra is among the best preserved archaeological areas in the region.
And amazingly, in over 2,000 years, it hasn't been impacted by any urban or industrial development.
Meaning what's left here at Hegra is probably one of the most reliable representations of the Nabatean civilization in the entire world.
An incredible testament to the past, best discovered from above. From giant mysteries carved by ancient civilizations to cryptic mountaintop formations, the view from above reveals centuries-old secrets. Atop the militarized zone of the Golan Heights between Israel and Syria lies a part of the world that is home to the oldest traces of human history.
This part of the world has been at the crossroads of human history since before the first words were ever written down.
Here, the view from above reveals one of the strangest sights in the entire Middle East. A giant spoked wheel made from piles of stone.
This place is massive. You can't take it in from a human height. There are no hills around, there are no mountains, so whoever built it, they couldn't actually see these circles.
So how did they construct it in such a picture-perfect radius? And who did they do it for? What is the purpose of this place?
In a land steeped in history, it could be just about anything.
In Arabic, it is called Rujum al-Hiri, meaning the stone heap of the wild cat. In Hebrew, it is named Gilgal Rephaim, a reference to a race of giants in the Bible. For others, it is simply called the Giant's Wheel.
Sitting in plain sight but unnoticed for centuries, it wasn't until after the Six-Day War of 1967 that the Golan was surveyed by archaeologists, and this structure was spotted by Israeli aerial reconnaissance.
From above, we see that this mysterious structure consists of a large circle of rocks containing 4 smaller concentric circles, each progressively thinner and some incomplete. Between the circular walls are interconnecting radial walls, creating the shape of a wheel.
So what is this thing?
That's a question historians, archaeologists, and other experts have been asking for years. No other structure like it has been found in the Near East.
When I see the full layout from above, it reminds me of one thing in particular, and that's castles. Actually, concentric castles, if I'm going to be exact.
This is the Holy Land, after all, and the Crusaders brought a whole new level of fortresses to the region.
Is this what we're seeing here? The ruins of a once mighty Christian stronghold?
Well, the location is certainly on point. For centuries, European powers clashed with Muslims for control of holy sites considered sacred by both groups, and present-day Israel was in the middle of it all.
Could the Giant's Wheel have been some kind of Crusader fortress? Roughly 40 kilometers to the southwest lies a possible clue, the Crusader castle of Belvoir.
Built around 1168, it is one of the earliest known and best preserved examples of concentric castle design.
The main feature of a concentric castle is a set of circular walls. You have this inner wall built out of stone with turrets positioned at intervals.
And then that is all surrounded by this equally thick but lower stone wall on the outside. And the walls are at different levels so that the people on the inside can shoot things out without hitting the people on the outside. Goes over them.
Although Belvoir Castle is not circular like some others, you can still clearly see by its ruins' footprint how it looks like one castle nested inside another. The similarity to the Giant's Wheel is striking.
But the walls of the Giant's Wheel were never high enough, even in their prime, to give a strident defense like you would see in a concentric stronghold like the one at Belvoir Castle.
And there's no evidence of a moat or a drawbridge.
And the Giant's Wheel, it's not situated in a particularly strategic location, or at least not one that's very obvious to any modern eye.
And there's another problem with the fortress theory.
The Giant's Wheel is very, very old, thought to have been built around the year 3500 BCE.
That means it's older than the Egyptian pyramids. That's way before the Crusaders ever got anywhere close to this land.
So if the Giant's Wheel wasn't built for defense, what was its purpose?
Archaeologists believe the site could likely have been a ritual center of some kind, possibly one linked to a cult of the dead.
We know other Neolithic circles were built for worshiping ancient gods or for the commemoration of the dearly departed, both of whom would have been able to see those circles from above.
Is that what we have here in the Golan Heights? A center for a cult of the dead?
Roughly 550 kilometers to the north, another ancient structure may offer a hint. Atop a limestone plateau in the arid southeastern Anatolia region of Turkey stands the world's greatest and oldest known megalith temple, Göbekli Tepe.
Göbekli Tepe is a complex of more than 20 circular stone enclosures. Archaeologists believe the sprawling 11,500-year-old site was first used at the dawn of the Neolithic period, which marked the appearance of the oldest permanent human settlements anywhere in the world.
This is as old as history can get. We're talking over twice as old as the Giant's Wheel.
Discovered in the early 1960s, archaeologists believe Göbekli Tepe was a sanctuary used by widespread groups of nomadic hunter-gatherers.
This site is built up of a bunch of circular structures supported by these massive stone pillars. And here's the thing, these were crafted and arranged by prehistoric people who had not yet developed metal tools or even pottery.
The similarity with the Giant's Wheel, it's incredible, actually, because you've got these concentric rings that are connected by these radial walls, which are kind of like spokes, and they're at irregular intervals. And what they do is to divide the circular areas into unequal segments.
But unlike the Giant's Wheel, the pillars of Göbekli Tepe are richly decorated with figurative anthropomorphic details and reliefs of wild animals, providing archaeologists with rare insights into the particular iconography of the period and even prehistoric spiritual beliefs.
Anthropologists point to these stone carvings as proof of a cult of the dead, inferring that the carved animals are there to protect the deceased.
With no such carvings at the Giant's Wheel, does the Göbekli Tepe cult of the dead offer other clues? Are there other powerful symbols here at work? What could the concentric circular design mean?
Researchers suggest that the concentric circle design might represent ripples on the surface of a lake when an object is dropped into the water. Circular undulations that symbolize the miraculous cycle of death and rebirth for the ancients.
Throughout history, and even prehistory, humans have built long-lasting monuments to honor their dead.
Is it possible that the Giant's Wheel was originally an elaborate grave?
We know that these Neolithic tombs, called dolmens, are formed by getting this large slab resting on these stone uprights to form a kind of protected tomb. Now, these are common throughout Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. But these structures are rarely constructed in a series of concentric rock circles like we see on the Golan Heights.
Can a closer look at the centerpiece of the Giant's Wheel reveal an important clue?
At the center of the Giant's Wheel is this chamber. Is it possible that it's a burial chamber?
Despite extensive excavations, precious few relics have been found. To date, only some bronze arrowheads, a single pin, and golden earrings.
But, and most importantly, no human remains have been found.
And even more confounding, some archaeologists have recently claimed that the central dolmen was built from smaller rocks that were assembled roughly 1,500 years after the surrounding walls were constructed.
Meaning even if it were a tomb, that may not have been the site's original function, as the dolmen tomb may be over 1,000 years newer than the site itself.
So we're not only left with questions about who the dolmen was built for, we're not even sure it was built as a burial chamber in the first place.
Could there be another explanation?
When you've got so few artifacts recovered at the site and you've got no human remains, maybe the Giant's Wheel was a different type of mausoleum. A place where the deceased weren't actually buried, but rather were laid to rest.
We might be left with a rather grisly conclusion. The Giant's Wheel was an excarnation facility.
What we might have here is a sky burial.
The bodies of the deceased would be placed on top of stone mounds or towers out in the open air so they could be picked clean by vultures.
Still practiced today in remote parts of India, China, Tibet, and Mongolia. Sky burials were once popular in the ancient Middle East. And signs of this tradition still stand in nearby Iran, structures known as Towers of Silence.
A Tower of Silence is a circular raised structure built for excarnation. That is, the exposure of human corpses to the elements for decomposition.
The Yazd Tower of Silence in Iran is an excellent example. This ancient circular tower still stands, but it's not used anymore.
Could this be what we're seeing in Israel? Is it the remains of a sky burial platform?
Although the practice of excarnation was widely practiced all throughout this region by many different groups, it's impossible for experts to know if the Giant's Wheel was intended for this purpose.
Today, the truth behind the Giant's Wheel has yet to be uncovered.
Someone built this huge structure. We just don't know who, or why, or exactly when, or how.
The Giant's Wheel remains an absolute mystery, and it's one that can only be truly appreciated when viewed from above.
On the highest peak of the eastern Taurus Mountains in southeastern Turkey, an ancient site holds an eerie mystery.
What is this place? It looks like a mountaintop crowned with a huge pyramid.
It's like a mountain sitting on top of another mountain.
This is Mount Nemrut, a 2,000-meter peak crowned by a monumental limestone shrine built to honor an ancient king.
Beneath this massive mound of rocky fragments is rumored to be the final resting place of King Antiochus I, who ruled the ancient Commagene kingdom in the 1st century BCE.
And there appear to be giant stone-carved heads. And some of these, they kind of look like garden gnomes.
These stone heads represent King Antiochus I, and they're a deified anthropomorphic representation of his Commagene kingdom, and a whole kind of other assortment of Greek and Eastern gods, with a lion and an eagle at each end.
The fact that King Antiochus I commissioned sculptures of himself alongside 2 lions, 2 eagles, and various Greek and Eastern gods is compelling proof of his megalomania.
He was a ruler who thought he was equal to the gods.
Archaeologists have long wondered if the good King Antiochus does indeed lie hidden underneath the massive stone tumulus.
Any substantial digging is pretty much impossible without disrupting tons of stone.
This is a place not short on mysteries. I mean, how did the ancients amass this enormous quantity of limestone fragments? And then how do they transport it to the top of the mountain? It's incredible.
And an even more compelling mystery is, why are these giant stone heads here? What was their purpose?
It certainly wouldn't be the only place in the world where lone giant stone heads reside.
Could there be clues lying with other ancient cultures who crafted really similar massive stone heads?
Perhaps a clue can be found 17,000 kilometers away on Easter Island, home to the most famous oversized heads in the world.
And to be honest, the only reason anyone knows where Easter Island is.
Here, the Rapa Nui people created giant heads, called moai, as monuments to honor ancestors and chiefs whose supernatural powers were believed to protect the community.
Between roughly 1100 and 1650 CE, Rapa Nui carvers create some 900 of these kind of very minimalist sculptures, nearly all of which are still in situ.
The giant stone sculptures commonly weigh between 10 and 12 tons. Their average height is roughly 13 feet, but some are much taller, considerably larger than those on Mount Nemrut.
Contrary to common belief, the moai are actually more than just giant heads. They're actually whole-body human figures. Their oversized heads epitomize a sculptural trait consistent with the Polynesian belief in the sanctity of the head.
As with the giant heads on Easter Island, could the giant heads at Nemrut have been carved in honor of the spiritual power of the head?
A view from above reveals there's something very different about the heads at Mount Nemrut, and it's standing right behind them.
The stone heads are not solitary sculptures, but rather belong to the statutory bodies whose bases stand nearby.
These giant stone heads that we see today were actually set upright by archaeologists decades ago, and they were once actually connected with their stone bodies. But at some point, as we can see, they've been beheaded.
So why did these huge stone statues lose their heads?
One theory that deserves attention is perhaps the simplest. Maybe the heads of King Antiochus and fellow gods and guardians were just victims of wear and tear over time.
This region is legendary for its harsh environment. The desolate, windswept mountaintop is exposed to all manners of erosion.
Maybe they just fell over? Gravity, as they say, always wins.
But all 10 statues? And only the heads? That seems highly unlikely.
Could there be another natural phenomenon behind the beheading of these giants?
This part of the world is notorious for its unpredictable and catastrophic seismic activity. Earthquakes have devastated parts of Turkey since the beginning of recorded history.
Much of Turkey is located on the Anatolian Plate, which is squeezed by the collision of two other tectonic plates, the Arabian and Eurasian.
And Mount Nemrut sits right in the crosshairs of these colliding tectonic plates.
Could previous tremors over the past 2,000 years be responsible for the toppling of these stone heads?
Although this part of Turkey is prone to violent seismic activity, the likelihood that all 10 heads, and only the heads, break off seems very improbable.
So what separated these heads from their bodies? The next theory to consider points to the handiwork not of Mother Nature, but of humans.
When you have the fall of the Roman Empire and the fall of the Greek Empire before it, you get the systematic destruction of many of their buildings and cultural emblems. So the heads and limbs of countless statues suffered significant damage as they were toppled.
Fully intact statues are seldom found archaeologically.
Did the statues at Mount Nemrut suffer a similar fate through acts of vandalism? Or perhaps looters seeking royal treasure from the burial mound?
Archaeologists are confident the immense stony tumulus has remained impregnable since it was constructed 2 millennia ago. So looting probably isn't the answer.
Okay, we can't rule out centuries of roving bands of ne'er-do-wells, but a closer look at Nemrut leads experts to a really different conclusion.
An examination of the statues reveals that they were not carved as one piece, but were instead made of multiple pieces assembled together. Is it possible the heads were designed for easy replacement?
In Roman times, the removal of statue heads was sometimes a matter of pragmatism. Roman statue makers often created interchangeable, archetypal body types to be married with separate, highly individualized heads.
If a sculpture of a hero or an eminent person or ruler lost their good name or their honor, or they just simply died, the head was easily removed and replaced by a new hero, a better-known person or a new ruler.
The heads at Nemrut were crafted separately from the statues. So theoretically, they could have been replaced or even swapped out, but weighing tons apiece and requiring weeks, if not months of sculpting, never mind the arduous task of transporting them to the top of a mountain, all that seems like a highly unlikely scenario.
Instead, archaeologists believe that at some point there was a collective effort to demolish the statues, with no heed to King Antiochus I and his desire for eternal recognition. Too bad.
Historians simply don't know. Despite King Antiochus I's best efforts to deify himself, maybe his own people soured on him. That could explain why people chose to vandalize symbols dedicated to him.
We've seen parallels of this in modern times, from ISIS demolishing pagan statues in Syria to Americans tearing down or vandalizing statues of their own problematic historic figures.
This policy is known as damnatio memoriae, a Latin phrase meaning condemnation of memory. What this does is indicate that a person is being excluded from official accounts. They're being cancelled in some way. Now, that someone could be considered a tyrant or a traitor or some other enemy of the state. And they're being vilified for some reason and basically cleansed, expunged from the collective memory.
Is this what happened to the statues on Mount Nemrut?
If so, what caused the turn against Antiochus? Archaeologists and historians can't point to any historical record or particular event that may have turned the people against the good god King Antiochus.
Perhaps the key to solving this mystery is the heads themselves.
Again, we look at ancient Romans for insight. If a particular person was hated after they died, the Romans would chisel away and deface any statue of them.
When we take a closer look at the damage on the stone heads, we're left with one conclusion. That damage was intentional.
There's a pattern to it, particularly their noses. When and exactly why it was done is lost to history. But the facial damage was not caused by strong earthquakes or kids pulling a prank. It was deliberate.
King Antiochus was a small ruler with big ambitions and an even bigger ego, and that, as we know, can sometimes rub people the wrong way.
Inscriptions found at the site commanded that people celebrate his memory for eternity. Unfortunately, his imperial cult didn't last for long after his death in 38 BCE.
But his statues survived on top of Mount Nemrut. Okay, but they were in pieces. No one knows for sure why they were decapitated or who did it, but here they lay.
Inscribed on the walls are the parting words of the self-styled king god, Antiochus. Warnings to those who would harm this work. They go something like this. Whosoever, whether king or emperor, harms the gods or this monument, may they face all manner of catastrophe.
It's only with a view from above that we can fully absorb the legacy of King Antiochus's shrine to himself and the mystery that surrounds it, lying unsolved in broken stone.
From an ancient calendar carved into a Peruvian mountain ridge, to a city of the dead in the Arabian desert, to a mysterious wheel named for giants, and headless sentinels protecting a once mighty king. All long-standing secrets best explored from above.